Week one of college football is in the books. The new AP Top 25 poll is out, and Louisville is now ranked. We'll break it down on today's episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Card Nation, what's going on, everyone? Welcome into this Tuesday edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. Want to personally take this time to thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, Locked On Louisville free and available on all streaming services 5 days a week, your team every day. Now, today's episode of the show is brought to you by Ultimate College Football HC. It's a brand new mobile game that is completely free, has no ads, and is 100% playable offline. Use the promo code LOCKEDONCFB, that's in all caps, inside the game store to receive a free boost to your program. Begin your coaching legacy today. Week one of college football has come and gone. Louisville 62-0 over Austin Peay. And in the new AP Top 25 poll, the Cardinals have found themselves ranked. We'll react to that. We'll also dive into the wild weekend from the ACC. Florida State 0-2, Miami putting the nation on watch. A lot of stuff to talk about in the week one takeaways in the conference. And then there's a lot of narratives floating around there, or lack thereof, I should say, with the Louisville Cardinals. We'll explain a little bit more about what I mean by that and why you shouldn't get caught up in those narratives if you are a Cardinals fan. So before we turn the page and start to preview and focus on that matchup against Jacksonville State week 2, 3:30 kickoff on Saturday at Cardinal Stadium against the Jacksonville State Gamecocks. The new rankings are out. And I'll be completely honest with you. I was in the middle of recording the episode reacting to the USA Today coaches poll rankings, in which Louisville is in the top 25 of that, thinking to myself, well, AP Top 25 might come out on Wednesday. No. They dropped right in the middle of my recording, so take two. But nonetheless, good news for Cardinals fans. After opening up the season 62-0 against Austin Peay, Louisville has found their way inside of the top 25 rankings, ranked at number 22. If you remember, coming into this week, Louisville was on the other receiving votes list, and they were pretty much team number 26 in the ranking. So this makes a little bit of sense with Texas A&M losing. I found it very interesting of something else that happened. I'll tell you about that coming up here in just a second. But overall, I think it's pretty much justified, right? I mean, Louisville was arguably a top 25 team coming into the season, and when they got left out, I think that they were one of the teams that everybody's like, wait, why are they not in the top 25? And I remember saying a couple weeks ago, look, let things play out, handle business on a weekly basis, and you're going to get into the top 25. Don't worry. And it happened maybe a little bit earlier than I thought. I felt like the top 25 was going to handle business. I wasn't expecting Florida State to lose 2 games. Now, Texas A&M losing, it is what it is against Notre Dame, but they ended up dropping out of the rankings. Currently, Louisville at number 22. You look at the rest of the rankings, who rose the most, who dropped. Notre Dame is up into the top 5 now. Oregon dropped a little bit after barely beating Idaho. Missouri rose a bit. Miami jumped up 7 spots to number 12. They are the top-ranked ACC team. You have Louisville as the next ranked ACC opponent, or ACC team, not opponent. Georgia Tech also rose into the rankings at number 23. NC State stayed put at number 24. And then Clemson dropped 11 spots to number 25. So there are 5 ACC teams in the top 25. And if you can't tell by the process of elimination, yes, Florida State has dropped out of the rankings after starting the season number 9. They've lost their last 2 games, both in ACC play, and they are pretty much, I'm looking at the other receiving votes category, and they're not even on the other receiving votes line at the moment. Like you have Texas A&M is the next team. And I found it very interesting. Number 27 is actually Boston College, that home win against Florida State. I know that Florida State is no longer ranked, but it did look pretty solid in the eyes of the AP poll. They are right there. Looking throughout the rest of the rankings, a couple of SEC teams. You have North Carolina with 4 votes. Kentucky has 2. And so on and so forth. It's pretty similar to the USA Today poll. Clemson and NC State are actually over Louisville in this poll at number 22 and 23. Cardinals at number 24. And then Washington is the only difference at 25. But Florida State and A&M both dropped out of the top 25 in that poll as well. Georgia Tech, the next team out. Kentucky got more votes. SMU has 19 votes in the USA Today coaches poll. Boston College not as favored as the AP poll. North Carolina has 3. Syracuse got a vote as well. So ultimately, pretty much what you would expect from the first weekend of games as it sort of relates to specifically the ACC. I'm not really surprised that Georgia Tech rose into the poll. I'm okay with that. Clemson falling as much as they did, I mean, it is what it is. Even though you lost to Georgia, you got absolutely demolished. And then NC State. I'm really glad that NC State didn't come in before Louisville and Georgia Tech in this ranking, because I don't feel like they were justifiably going to be able to do so. Like, you barely, I mean, technically you beat them by 17, but you beat Western Carolina by 17, but you were losing going into the fourth quarter of that matchup. You just really didn't look all that good. I'm glad that the AP poll took that into consideration. So overall, first reaction is, I think it's honestly still low. I think Louisville is a top 20 team. I've said that throughout the offseason. I'll say it again. Just because they rose into the rankings, that's great. I'm glad that they're getting that recognition, but I still think that Louisville is better than number 22 and number 24, respectively, in both of these polls. Granted, the main thing that you focus on is what I've continued to echo. It's the mantra: handle business and control what you can control. Because if you win your games, if you win on a week in, week out basis, the rankings will come. They will. And I know that a lot of this is very odd on the way that these rankings work. But again, you can't control that. So you shut out your opponent in week 1. You were favored to beat him by 35-40. You beat him by 62-0. That's great. Turn the page and now focus on Jacksonville State. Because I promise, if you win like you're supposed to against Jacksonville State, I mean, I guess I can't promise, but it would be led to believe that it's going to be really hard to suggest that this team is going to move down. So you just have to focus on the task at hand moving forward. The difference between Iowa and Louisville as it comes to 21 and 22, it's a decent amount. I mean, it's 294 to 188. It just really is what it is. So Louisville being over Georgia Tech, I know that a lot of people were wondering, well, is the AP poll going to prioritize that win over Florida State? And here's the thing about it is, I think that both teams are ranked, obviously, if Florida State beats Boston College. However, I think that it's reversed. I think that Georgia Tech would be over the Cardinals if Florida State were to have beaten Boston College last night, because it would show that, hey, maybe that game against Georgia Tech was a fluke. It's now obvious that there are some major issues with the Seminoles. And it sort of takes away a little bit of the shine of that victory against Florida State and Ireland. So that's something that I think it just would have depended on what FSU would have done yesterday. I think that the AP poll got it right. And even though that I feel like Louisville is better than number 22 in the scope of where they were at number 26, the top other receiving votes team, to win the game the way you did, to have teams ahead of you lose. I'm really glad that they dropped Florida State out of the top 25, because some were wondering, well, I mean, FSU was, they were still right there. Does it make sense to drop them that much if they lost to Boston College? The short answer is 100% absolutely it should have. 0-2, they have not looked good in either game. They lost by double digits last night. It just makes the most amount of sense. But again, as encouraging as this is for Louisville, the mantra is controlling what you can control, because I promise if you don't do that, it doesn't matter what the rankings are going to read, right? So I'm sort of in two different styles of thinking here. Number one, it's great to see Louisville in the top 25. I love it. Number two, it really doesn't matter. You just got to win your games moving forward. And unfortunately, beating teams you're supposed to beat, not really. The ACC overall had a decent week one, pretty solid week one. But there are some key takeaways that we must discuss, and we'll do that coming up on the next segment of the Locked On Louisville podcast. Today's episode and title sponsor of the show is Ultimate College Football HC. I want to take a moment to give you a heads up on a brand new mobile game that I think you're going to love as much as I do. That is Ultimate College Football HC. In this amazing game, you get to step into the shoes of a head coach and lead your program to glory, whether it's recruiting players, hiring staff, overseeing training camps, and handling school scholarships. You control every crucial detail of your program. And here's what I really love about the game. You're responsible for calling offensive plays. So your strategy will not only determine the success of the season, but shape the future of your program. Ultimate College Football HC is completely free, has no ads, and is 100% playable offline. You can play on the go as you want and when you want to. Of course, we have a special offer for Locked On Louisville fans. Use the promo code LOCKEDONCFB. That's in all caps inside the game store to receive a free boost to your program. Make sure to take advantage of this perk as it will get your team off to a strong start. To download the game, just visit ultimate-cfb.com or look it up on the app stores. Ultimate College Football HC. Begin your coaching legacy today. Louisville fans, I know that the first week of college football has come and gone, but look, it's not too late to catch up before the season kicks off. SEC, ACC, Big 10, Big 12, you can get it all from Locked On's stable of college experts by subscribing to the Locked On College Football podcast. Reactions to week one, hot takes, anything that you need to know about who's going to contend for the conferences in the playoffs, be sure to follow and subscribe to the Locked On College Football podcast, home of the Locked On Podcast Network, part of your team every day. The ACC, it was a whirlwind Labor Day weekend for the conference. Some teams lost games that they weren't supposed to. Some teams got blown out. Other teams put the nation on watch. And then other teams squeaked out wins that didn't really give you much confidence moving forward for those teams. So there's three takeaways that I really want to discuss. And I want to make this a weekly segment throughout the duration of this college football season. It's basically going to be sort of a wrap-up of conference play from the week prior, the takeaways from the games on last week's slate. The first one, Florida State is 0-2, and they legitimately might have played themselves out of ACC championship game possibilities. Now, I know that it is still early. If Florida State were to go undefeated in the rest of conference play, they would definitely be involved in the conversation. But it's just that. These two losses that FSU has endured, both conference games. Georgia Tech and Boston College, two teams that FSU should have beaten at least by the numbers, by the spreads. So losing these two games completely eliminates the margin of error. Like you have to, I would say you would have to go undefeated in conference play to even have a chance. But you look at the rest of their conference schedule. They're at SMU. Technically they will host California a couple weeks. They're at SMU. They'll host Clemson. They'll go to Duke. On October 26th, they will visit Miami. And then they will host North Carolina. And then the last three games of the schedule is non-conference opponents, Notre Dame, Charleston Southern, and Florida. But you look at where they're at right now. Two teams have played conference matchups so far. That's Georgia Tech and Boston College, both of them against Florida State. And Florida State is 0-2. They are in last place of the ACC in a conference that they felt like they didn't have peers on a level playing ground. Very, very ironic, and you just absolutely, and I mean absolutely, hate to see it. Anyways, the main takeaway from conference play this week is that Florida State might have already played themselves out of ACC championship game consideration. Now, to play the devil's advocate, that means that Georgia Tech and Boston College are going to be two teams to watch for moving forward to see if their wins over the Seminoles were more of an indication of them being better than expected, or maybe Florida State just not being good whatsoever. I think it's probably a little bit of column A and column B. So we'll see how that factors into the mix. But Louisville will play both of those teams coming up in the first 8 weeks of the schedule. Georgia Tech is the first ACC team that the Cardinals will play, so that's something to focus on. Probably if Florida State going 0-2 is 1A, then Miami demolishing Florida is 1B. Now, I know that Florida is probably not the best team in the ACC or SEC. They're probably not even really one of the top half of the SEC teams, but it's the way in which Miami won. They looked dominant on both sides of the ball. Cam Ward was phenomenal. Probably the most impressive quarterback performance of week one throughout college football. He was absolutely electric. The Hurricanes went to the Swamp and won 41-17. They rose the most in college football in the AP rankings, and I think that it might be one of those years to where the talent is too good for Mario Cristobal to mess things up. So we'll see what happens. Unfortunately for fans that are wanting to see if Miami's legit, they really won't have a test, depending on how you view Virginia Tech. They won't have a test until they play Louisville in October. They have a very easy schedule: Florida A&M, Ball State, South Florida, Virginia Tech, and California. So Miami definitely looks the part at the moment. They very well might be the best team in the ACC at the moment, and that's okay. I knew that they were going to be really good in terms of a talent perspective, and if Cam Ward, if Miami gets that Cam Ward through the duration of the season, my goodness, they're going to be really tough to play, and I'm really glad that Louisville has them at home. So Florida State, Miami, sort of at the top of the takeaways, but there's also a group that I want to I want to have a close eye on. There's 5 teams. We talked about 2 of them, Georgia Tech and Boston College. I was really interested to see what Georgia Tech was going to do following that win against Florida State. And for the most part, yes, they beat Georgia State by 23 points. At times, they just really didn't look all that impressive. Like, it wasn't as encouraging of a win as I would have thought. They gave up 360 total yards to Georgia State offensively. And now, granted, Georgia Tech had 500 yards of offense, as they should have, but it wasn't as resounding of a victory as I thought it was going to be. So Georgia Tech is a team that I'm looking at in the next couple of weeks to really determine how good they actually are. They'll play at Syracuse this weekend. I think that that'll be a little bit of a better test than the Panthers were in week 2. So we'll see what Georgia Tech is able to do. And Boston College is sort of the same way. Boston College has a tough schedule. Duquesne is on the docket this weekend, which the Eagles should win. I think that Bill O'Brien will be a good ACC head coach. So seeing what they're going to be able to do against the Dukes, we'll see. But they do have a road game at Missouri coming up in a couple weeks. I want to see how Thomas Castellanos and company is able to lead that Eagles team. And then 3 other teams that did not have a good week 1 whatsoever. 2 of them lost, 1 of them won. We start with NC State. They were losing to start the 4th quarter against Western Carolina. Now they were able to wake up a little bit and win that game. But all eyes will be on them this weekend as they play 14th ranked Tennessee. That's going to be an interesting game. I think that Tennessee's quarterback, he's my vote for the Heisman Trophy winner. I think he's the guy I'm going to go with to win the Heisman Trophy. But NC State will really be put on display, and how they react to this game against Tennessee will tell us a lot about Dave Doran's team. Moving right on along, the other 2 teams, Clemson losing at Georgia. I know that they had some moments to where, the defense looked solid, but you lost 34-3. How much can you realistically take away that is encouraging? I know Georgia is a buzzsaw, best team in college football. You weren't even competitive in this game, though. You lost 34-3. Like, I understand moral victories here and there, but you can only take so much of a moral victory away from getting beat by 31 points. It's the second largest loss in Clemson history in season openers. So Clemson is a team that we will be watching for moving forward. I know they have App State, but they do have NC State coming up here in the next couple of weeks as well. And then finally, the most disappointing team, Virginia Tech. I went on this show last week and said, I think Virginia Tech's going to contend for the ACC. And then they lose in overtime to Vanderbilt. Now, Diego Pavia is a really good quarterback, but you lost to Vanderbilt. Hard to justify. They will have to bounce back and do so in a resounding way coming up against Marshall this weekend in Blacksburg. But those 5 teams, the 5 that I'm keeping an eye out on. It feels like the ACC is a bunch of moving parts at the moment, and Louisville fans are already starting to get annoyed and upset about some of the narratives that are out there or lack thereof. We'll discuss and also explain why you shouldn't get caught up in those narratives. That's coming up here on the final segment of this edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. Today's episode of the show also brought to you by 5-Hour Energy. I have started to use 5-Hour Energy after lunch every day because research shows that more than 70% of us hit the wall after lunch. So let a 5-Hour Energy shot help you leap over that wall instead of crashing into it. 5-Hour Energy shots give you that feeling of alertness and energy you need to get in the zone. On the site, you even have the option to build your own 12 or 24 pack. You choose the flavors, and it is delivered right to your door. The website has flavors galore with 0 sugar and a convenient portable size. It's the perfect pick-me-up to get stuff done. You go to 5hourenergy.com today. That's the number 5, followed by hourenergy.com. You can get some 5-Hour Energy products today, and using my promo code LOCKEDONCFB, you'll get 20% off your first order. The offer is only valid until September 30th on one order and can't be used with other promotions. The code is not good on subscription orders. Go to 5hourenergy.com today to take advantage of the opportunity at hand. And now into the final segment of this Tuesday edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. Thanks again for making Locked On Louisville your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, Locked On Louisville free and available on all streaming services 5 days a week. Your team every day. Louisville fans are already sort of annoyed with some of the narratives out there and also some of the lack of hype that Louisville is getting. Let's start with the narratives. I've seen a lot of people start to get a little bit annoyed with, Louisville beating Austin Peay, and some mainstream media tries to give them a little hype. And the response to that is, well, it's Austin Peay. They've got to prove themselves, despite other teams winning big against other team or against smaller opponents and getting more so of the hype. I think that this is just a simple case of you have to be realistic. I know that the win against Austin Peay, you're sitting there like, oh, it's 62-0. It still was Austin Peay. It was a game that you should have won by 35 to 40 points if the spread serves correctly. Jacksonville State will be a little bit of a better opponent for the Cardinals, but still it's going to be an opponent that Louisville should defeat. So I'll be honest, this really isn't a situation that's going to get better until, honestly, Louisville ends up proving that they are as good as we think they are. I think that Louisville fans know that this is a good team. But unfortunately, the way that the team lost the last 3 games last year doesn't really do much for the confidence of the rest of the country. So what you have to do is you have to do what you did last year. You have to make the rest of the country believe that you're legit. You did it by beating Notre Dame. You did it by shutting out Duke, beating Virginia Tech, and beating Miami. But then you lost the last 3 games. So you have to do it again. You got to do it again. That's all it comes down to. I think that the other thing that I think fans are rightfully annoyed with is just the lack of discussion of Louisville amongst the top teams in the ACC by not only those that cover the conference, but just, everyone as a whole. Put it this way. Since Louisville joined the conference in 2014, it always feels like every bit of praise is like backhand compliments. Like you've never felt like Louisville's really fully been accepted to the ACC. Like if you could do it all over again, I personally would have sent the team to the Big 12. That's just me. I understand that the powers that be sort of prevented that within the conferences, but overall, it really never felt like it feels like Louisville's just on an extended stay within this conference. That there's really there's not really like it feels like it's like the ACC's forced like, oh yeah, Miami, yeah, Georgia Tech, woohoo, Boston College, woo woo, Louisville. Yeah, good job, guys. Good job. It never really feels like Louisville has gotten that getting their props within the conference, and that's not going to change. That's really not going to change. So, those that say, well, Miami's the best team in the ACC, Georgia Tech's going to compete, Clemson's going to compete, Boston College might even compete. Louisville won their first game 62-0, and virtually nobody's talking about it. Again, it sort of trickles down from the national media and stuff like that, just not giving Louisville their props, is that Louisville's got to work extra hard, basically, to get that recognition. And it's something that you just have to come to terms with. It's not ideal. Whether it's fair or not, personally, I don't care. Because at the end of the day, what's the mantra? You control what you can control. If you start letting the outside noise, make you bitter to where you feel like you have a chip on your shoulder. Sometimes chips on your shoulder can work to your advantage, but sometimes they can also cloud your judgment and cloud your vision of what the goal is. So it is what it is, man. I will never expect the ACC to boost Louisville up on the pedestal with these other programs. Like the Tobacco Road rules the conference, despite the two teams feeling as if this isn't a level playing field. They'll always boost Florida State and Clemson at any turn. Miami will always get the benefit of the doubt. Louisville could be, this is hyperbolic, but Louisville could be 11-0, and people are like, are they going to make the ACC championship game? No, I'm playing to an extent. But you see it in preseason lists. You see, what does Quincy Riley have to do to get on these all ACC teams at the end of the year? Like, what does he have to do? I'm convinced Riley could have 2 punt returns for touchdowns, 4 interceptions in a game, and he's like, still not Defensive Player of the Week. He only did it against the number 5 team in the country. He should have done it against the number 4 team. Of course, it sounds a little sour. I say that in a playful manner because personally, I don't care what, the ACC or those that cover it say about the team or the program or the university. It is what it is. And that's what my advice would be to Louisville fans listening to this is don't get caught up in the narratives. Don't get caught up in the lack of hype. Don't get caught up in the lack of recognition. It's always been that way in the ACC. It's always going to be that way. The quicker you come to accept that, the better. But it is what it is. Only thing you can do, control what you can control. And that's what we got to do moving forward. So that is going to wrap up this Tuesday edition of the show. Moving out through the rest of the week, we'll preview the upcoming matchup against Jacksonville State and much, much more. Everyone have a great day. We'll see you right back here